secret tunnel beneath McDonald's. However, what he saw at the bottom shocked the entire country. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're viewing this video. The sun had barely begun to rise over the sweltering horizon of Riverport, casting a dull orange glow over cracked sidewalks and swaying telephone wires. The town was already stirring, its heartbeat slow and sleepy like a body reluctant to wake. Air conditioners hummed in tired windows, and dogs barked lazily behind chain-link fences. But inside the police cruiser, idling at the edge of Easton Boulevard, Marcus Hale sat in silence, sipping black coffee from a stainless steel thermos, his mind miles away from the peaceful streets before him. At 48, Marcus had learned to read a town like most people read a book. The rhythm of Riverport rarely changed. Morning brought joggers and school buses, afternoons the same old traffic, and nights were supposed to be quiet. That's what bothered him. Something had shifted. The night had started smelling wrong. He rolled down his window slightly, letting in the thick, humid air of early summer. It smelled of diesel, sun-baked concrete, and distant fried grease. Nothing unusual. But behind it all was something else. Something sour and artificial, like rubber and mildew. Something faint but persistent. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it clung to the edge of his senses like a mosquito's whine. Marcus turned onto the access road behind the McDonald's on Doral Street, the one near the closed-down movie theater. It had been part of the community for over 20 years, a place where high school kids hung out, where Little League teams grabbed post-game fries, where elderly couples sipped coffee at 6 a.m. But lately, that familiar landmark had started to feel unfamiliar. The official closing time was 11 p.m., and yet Marcus had noticed something curious over the past few weeks. Despite no lights and no customers, movement still flickered behind the tinted windows past midnight. Delivery trucks came at odd hours. Security cameras covering the restaurant's rear lot went mysteriously dark between 11:30 p.m. and 3 a.m. every single night. Every camera on that block, not just the ones belonging to McDonald's. When he'd asked the tech department, they shrugged it off as a network hiccup. Marcus didn't believe in coincidences, not after 2 decades of patrols, interrogations, and field reports. Something was wrong. He pulled the cruiser to a stop beside the dumpster enclosure, far from the streetlights. The parking lot was empty, as expected at this hour, but a faint glow seeped through the frosted side windows. He turned off the engine and sat, motionless, watching. A soft humming sound, barely audible, came from inside the building, more industrial than electrical. Not the usual whir of a freezer or HVAC. It had rhythm, a pulse. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small black leather notebook. The pages were filled with sparse, tight handwriting, his own notes from the last 3 weeks. Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, unfamiliar license plates, everything that didn't fit. He flipped to the last entry and wrote in today's date, adding, "Same delivery truck, no logo, no plates. Arrived 1:47 a.m., left 2:06 a.m., no lights, no driver seen. Suspicious noise still present. Request review denied." He clicked the pen closed, slid the notebook back into its slot, and stepped out of the vehicle. The pavement radiated heat even in the early morning, as if the day's sun had been trapped inside it like a held breath. As he walked slowly toward the dumpster, something caught his eye near the rusted gate, a scrap of fabric, half buried in gravel. He knelt. It was a small, pink t-shirt, children's size, the kind with a glittery cartoon animal printed on the front, now smeared with dirt and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. He picked it up by the edge, heart tightening, and turned it over in his gloved hands. A name tag sewn into the collar had been torn out. Behind him, a delivery truck rumbled down a nearby road, passing without slowing. Marcus remained crouched, staring at the t-shirt, his jaw clenched. There was no reasonable explanation for that shirt to be there. Not in this condition, not at this hour, not behind a restaurant that supposedly shut its doors hours ago. He slipped the shirt into an evidence bag and zipped it shut. Then he stood and looked up at the building. The McDonald's sign, with its cheerful golden arches, flickered once as if in response. His eyes narrowed. He remembered something his father had once said to him after catching a thief in their neighborhood church. "Evil doesn't wear horns, boy. It wears a smile and hands you a warm meal." At the time, Marcus had thought it was just one of his dad's many strange sayings. But now he wasn't so sure. Over the next several days, the unease grew. Marcus began shifting his patrol schedule subtly, taking midnight routes past the restaurant more often, parking just out of view, watching. The same pattern repeated itself. Blacked-out vehicles, people entering through side doors, sometimes staying for hours. And always the cameras in the area went offline just as they arrived. He approached the department's tech office again and asked for hard backups. They told him the hard drives had looped over, which was supposed to happen only every 90 days. These had looped in a week. When he raised the issue with Captain Dunham, the reply was curt. "You're seeing ghosts, Hale. Let it go. There's nothing down there but burgers and fries." But Marcus couldn't let it go. Something had embedded itself in his mind and wouldn't release its grip. It wasn't just instinct. It was something colder, deeper, like a splinter under the skin you couldn't see but knew was there. The kind that infected everything if left alone. He drove by again the following night and saw a new figure standing at the rear entrance. Tall, bald, wearing a black jacket. Not the usual uniform. He leaned against the wall, smoking, glancing around like a man expecting trouble. Marcus parked half a block away and watched through binoculars. At 2:13 a.m., the man tapped on the metal door. It opened from the inside. 2 men emerged, dragging what looked like a folded cot wrapped in plastic. Something heavy. Marcus recorded the time, wrote down the sequence, snapped a few photos with his phone. But when he returned to his patrol car and opened the department-issued reporting app, the screen froze. Then went black. When it came back, the last photo he'd taken was gone. He stared at the screen in silence for a long minute, then powered the phone off completely. The next morning, he stopped by Internal Affairs, quietly, off the record. Asked if any complaints had been filed against that particular McDonald's franchise. The clerk at the desk raised an eyebrow and said, "That place, clean as a whistle. Inspector from state was just there 2 months ago." When Marcus asked for the name of the inspector, the clerk hesitated. "I'll have to get back to you on that." That evening, Marcus sat alone at his kitchen table, the pink t-shirt lying in the center under a reading lamp. He had cleaned it carefully. The stains remained. He looked at it for a long time, his fingers tapping the wood in a slow, steady rhythm. Then, he reached across the table and pulled his personal notebook toward him. He flipped to a fresh page. He wrote 5 words. "They think no one's watching." Then he underlined them twice. The next night, he didn't just patrol. He stayed. He waited. And this time, he planned to get inside. The following morning began the way most did in Riverport, but Marcus Hale carried a weight he couldn't shake, even as the town yawned into its usual routine. The sun was already too bright when he walked into the station, his badge clipped to his belt, uniform pressed, and expression unreadable. The front desk officer nodded to him with casual familiarity, but Marcus barely acknowledged the gesture. He went straight to his desk and sat down, opening his laptop without a word. A folder marked Doral Saint Observation Logs blinked up at him. He clicked it open and scrolled through his notes. Timelines, license plate numbers, some real, most clearly fake. Descriptions of movements, patterns, faces in the dark. But what stood out most, even to him, was the consistency. Night after night, the same routine, the same delivery vans, the same shadow figures, and always the disappearing footage. He took a breath and stood, the folder still open, and walked with purpose toward the office at the end of the hall. He knocked once, opened the door without waiting for a reply. Captain Dunham looked up from his paperwork, his expression tightening the moment he saw Marcus. "Captain," Marcus began, standing just inside the door. Dunham leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. "What's on your mind, Hale?" "I need a formal request for camera backup from the Easton and Doral feed. There's interference every night from 11:30 to—" Dunham cut him off with a sigh. "Marcus, we've been through this. The IT department says it's a software issue. A software issue that only happens when unmarked vehicles show up to a closed restaurant at 2 in the morning." Marcus's voice remained level, but his eyes burned with frustration. Dunham leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You've been chasing shadows for weeks. You know how this department works. We get a report, we check it out. No report, no action, and you don't have a report. Just notes and gut feelings." "I found a child's shirt," Marcus said quietly, "covered in blood, behind a closed restaurant." The room fell silent. Dunham stared at him, then leaned back again. "Did you log it?" Marcus hesitated. "No." Dunham exhaled sharply. "Then it doesn't exist." Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. "I'm telling you, something is happening at that place. We're missing something big. I don't know if it's trafficking, drugs, weapons, I don't care. But it's not just burgers and fries. Not anymore." Dunham's gaze hardened. "Do you have any idea how many times this city's had its peace disturbed by people seeing things that weren't there? You want to burn goodwill over a McDonald's?" "I'm not burning anything," Marcus said. "I'm trying to stop something before it explodes." Dunham shook his head slowly. "You're done with that site, Hale. That's an order. Hand off any personal footage you've got. Close your notes. Move on." Marcus didn't move. His jaw worked back and forth, a storm beneath the surface. Then he gave a stiff nod and turned to leave. Back at his desk, he sat in silence for a long moment. Around him, the usual office noise swirled. Phones ringing, printers humming, small talk about weekend plans. None of it reached him. He opened his notebook again, staring at the words he'd written the night before. "They think no one's watching." He flipped the page. They're wrong. That night, Marcus didn't clock in. He called in a personal day, left his cruiser parked at home, and changed into plain clothes. Black jeans, dark gray hoodie, work boots. In the back of his closet, he retrieved a case he hadn't opened in years. It held a compact DSLR camera with infrared capability, a handheld radio scanner, and an old police-issue voice recorder. Tools from another life. He made his way back to Doral Street on foot, parking 2 blocks away and approaching from the shadows. The night was thick and close, crickets chirping in the grass like nervous whispers. He found the alley behind the McDonald's and set up his camera, balancing it on a stack of pallets behind a trash enclosure. The lens pointed directly at the service entrance. He waited. At 1:42 a.m., the first vehicle appeared. A matte gray van, no plates, tinted windows. It pulled into the rear lot without headlights. Moments later, a second SUV arrived, black, massive, with a front grille that caught the faint light like a predator's smile. From inside the restaurant, the rear service door opened. A man in dark clothing emerged, scanning the lot before signaling the vehicles forward. Marcus hit record. From the van, 2 men stepped out, each wearing gloves. They moved to the rear and opened the doors. A figure was led out, small, hunched, covered by a blanket. One of the men adjusted something on the person's wrists. Even in the low light, Marcus could see it. Handcuffs. His breath caught in his throat. They guided the figure into the restaurant. The doors closed behind them. The lot fell silent again. Marcus turned off the camera. He'd seen enough. He waited another half hour, heart pounding in his chest, before collecting his gear and slipping away into the night. Back at home, he uploaded the footage to a private server, encrypting the file with a password only he knew. He watched it 3 times, each pass revealing new horrors. The shuffling feet, the glint of metal restraints, the casual efficiency of the men. He called the department's tip line anonymously and left a message disguising his voice. Then he called an old friend. Paul Garcia had left the department 5 years earlier to start his own private investigations firm. He owed Marcus his life, and Marcus had never called in that debt until now. "I need a name," Marcus told him, owner of the McDonald's on Doral, "and I need it quietly." Paul didn't ask questions. Within 24 hours, he had the answer. Martin Vellon, a real estate investor out of Baton Rouge, owned 5 McDonald's franchises, none of which he personally visited. All 5 had oddities in their financial records. Delivery charges listed under obscure shell companies, unusually high water usage during closed hours, staffing irregularities. Marcus dug deeper. 2 of Vellon's other locations had once received citations for health code violations, yet both cases had vanished from public records. The inspectors listed on the documents: no longer working. No forwarding addresses. He printed everything and laid it out on his dining table like a crime scene. Threading the pieces together took hours, but when he was done, a pattern emerged, and it pointed straight underground. He returned to the restaurant 2 nights later, slipping around the back like a ghost. There were no vehicles that night, but something else caught his attention, an odd vibration beneath his feet, like distant machinery. He placed his palm to the ground. The concrete buzzed faintly. He stood slowly, scanning the area. Then he noticed something near the dumpster, a trail of wheel marks leading to a portion of the wall that looked newer than the rest. He approached, tracing the edge with his fingers. There was a seam in the brickwork. Vertical, unnatural, a door, but no handle. He stepped back, heart thudding, and made a note in his head. They were hiding something, hiding it well. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table staring at the files at the still frame of the shackled figure and knew he couldn't wait anymore. The department wouldn't help him. The state wouldn't help him. Whatever was happening beneath that restaurant was happening with someone's permission, but not his. The next night, he would go inside. Not with a badge, not with backup, but with a flashlight, a gun, and the quiet resolve of a man who had already made peace with what might come next. Because when no one else sees the truth, it falls to the one who does to act. And Marcus Hale had never been the kind of man to look away. The next day unfolded like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. Marcus moved through it quietly, methodically, knowing that by the time the sun slipped behind the horizon, he would be doing something that couldn't be undone. In the daylight, the town looked the same, predictable, comfortable, clean, but his eyes could no longer see it the way others did. The truth had begun to rot the surface of things, peeling back the paint to show the corroded machinery underneath. He spent the morning at the hardware store, buying what he needed without attracting attention. A multi-purpose utility belt, a set of folding bolt cutters, a pair of tactical gloves, a crowbar small enough to fit under his jacket, but strong enough to do damage. At home, he packed his equipment into a nondescript duffel bag and added his sidearm, cleaned and loaded. He left his badge behind. Whatever he would find that night, it was not part of any official investigation. It was personal now. As twilight spread over Riverport like a slowly suffocating sheet, Marcus parked several blocks away from the McDonald's and approached on foot, moving through the alleyways like a shadow. He had timed it carefully. The building's last visible staff had left around 11, just as they had for the past few weeks. By midnight, the lights would be out, and the real operation, whatever it was, would begin. That gave him a small window to enter unnoticed. He crouched behind the dumpster enclosure, the same place where he had found the blood-stained T-shirt. The silence felt unnatural. Even the usual hum of passing traffic was muted, like the air itself was holding its breath. He waited 5 minutes, then 10, watching the rear door. No movement. He moved fast. Pulling the duffel over his shoulder, Marcus darted across the lot and reached the door. A keycard lock blinked red. He didn't waste time trying to hack it. He'd already tested the building during his earlier surveillance and discovered a narrow window of time when the kitchen's service entrance remained loosely secured after staff closed. A flaw, perhaps unnoticed, or perhaps left open intentionally. Either way, it was his way in. He slipped a thin pry bar between the frame and door and gently leaned in. The mechanism gave with a quiet pop. He entered. The air inside was heavy with fryer oil and industrial disinfectant. The fluorescent lights were off, but soft emergency strips lit the edges of the kitchen. Everything was meticulously clean, unnervingly so. No half-used ingredients, no cluttered prep surfaces. It was like someone had scrubbed away every trace of human activity. He moved slowly through the stainless steel maze of counters and grills, boots soft on the tile. In the center of the kitchen stood the fry station, empty and cool, but what caught his attention was the floor beneath it. The tiles had a faint seam, perfectly square. He stepped closer and crouched, brushing away a thin layer of grime. There it was, a recessed grip, small and round, barely noticeable to anyone not looking for it. A hidden hatch. Marcus's pulse quickened. He slipped on his gloves and braced himself. The grip resisted at first, then gave way with a creak that sounded too loud in the silence. He opened the hatch slowly, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness, a metal ladder built into the side. A thick wave of air rose up to meet him, damp, earthy, and cold, smelling of rust and mold. It was a smell that didn't belong beneath a fast-food kitchen. He pulled out his flashlight and aimed it down. The beam revealed concrete walls, moisture glistening in the creases, and the ladder disappearing into black. He secured the hatch open with a kitchen cart and began his descent. The ladder went down farther than he expected. 20 rungs, then 30. He counted each one as a distraction from the pounding in his chest. The flashlight beam bobbed with each step, casting jagged shadows that danced like phantoms on the slick walls. His boots finally met solid ground, wet concrete, uneven and cold. He exhaled slowly and turned the beam forward. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to pass without turning his shoulders. The walls were reinforced concrete, not brick or dirt, with seams and construction markers etched into them. Professional work. There were pipes running along the ceiling, thick cables bundled together with zip ties, and emergency lighting installed every 15 feet. Someone had built this with purpose. He moved forward, each footstep echoing off the damp walls. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere ahead, like a metronome ticking off time he didn't have. As he walked, he saw the occasional sign of use: scuff marks, smudges, a candy wrapper flattened under a boot print. The tunnel stretched on, gently sloping downward, curving slightly to the left. After what felt like 10 minutes, he reached a junction, one tunnel splitting into two. A metal sign bolted to the wall read B, with an arrow pointing left and C to the right. No explanation. No labels. He hesitated, then chose the right. The air grew colder. He passed what looked like an old security checkpoint, now abandoned. A desk, a chair, a dusty monitor, an empty cup of coffee that had long since dried into a black ring. On the wall beside it, a keypad, powered, glowing dim green. This wasn't old infrastructure. This was active. The tunnel widened ahead, opening into a small chamber with concrete flooring and metal shelving along the walls. Boxes lined the shelves, unmarked, sealed with heavy tape. Marcus opened one and found medical supplies: syringes, gauze, vials of clear fluid labeled in Cyrillic. Another box held burner phones, still in plastic wrap. Another, cheap duffel bags filled with clothing in child and teen sizes. His stomach turned. He heard a sound behind him, metal shifting, a soft echo of movement. He spun, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but the tunnel was empty. He backed away slowly, eyes wide, ears straining. The air was too quiet now, like something was holding its breath. He needed to move. He took a final glance at the boxes and snapped a photo with his phone, then turned and continued down the tunnel. Further in, the walls changed. Where before they had been smooth and professional, here they were scarred. Gouges, scratches. Someone had tried to claw their way out. There were stains, brownish, old, dried into the walls. He passed a door, metal, locked, no window, then another, then a third, slightly ajar. He pushed it open slowly. Inside was a small room with a bed, a sink, and a bucket. Nothing else. No light. The mattress was stained, the bucket half full. Etched into the wall, carved over and over, were words, some in English, some not. One phrase repeated more than any other: "Don't forget me." Marcus swallowed hard and stepped back. This was no storage facility, no fallout shelter. This was a prison. He continued on, flashlight shaken now. His muscles were tight, heart pounding in his ears. He reached another room. The door was open. He stepped inside. It was larger than the others. There was a table in the center, metal with restraints at each corner. Chains, a tray with tools, not surgical, industrial, bolt cutters, rubber mallet, a cattle prod. He couldn't breathe. He turned to leave and nearly collided with the figure standing silently in the hallway. They stared at each other for a second, then two, before the man lunged. Marcus reacted instinctively, dodging the grab and slamming his flashlight into the side of the man's head. The beam shattered. Darkness swallowed them. Hands grappled in the black, fists slammed into flesh. Marcus hit the floor, rolled, and drew his weapon. A shot rang out, then silence. He stood, chest heaving, and found the flashlight's remnants, its bulb still faintly glowing. He pointed it at the figure on the ground. The man wasn't moving. He stumbled back through the tunnel, heart hammering, light dimming. He had to find another way out. Behind him, something creaked. The darkness was alive. He wasn't alone anymore, and he had seen too much to ever be safe again. For a long moment, Marcus stood in the dim corridor, his breath ragged, his knuckles trembling around the cracked remains of the flashlight. The man lay motionless at his feet, sprawled awkwardly where he had fallen, a dark stain already blooming beneath his head. Marcus didn't know if he was dead, unconscious, or faking, and frankly, he didn't care. There wasn't time to check. His instincts screamed at him to move, get away, go deeper, find cover, find answers. Somewhere in the distance, behind concrete and shadows, he heard another sound, a low mechanical click, a door unlocking. Or locking. He took one step back, then another, eyes straining in the low glow of the fractured bulb. The hallway stretched on behind him, cold and narrow, pulsing with stale air and dread. Every footfall sounded like a warning. Somewhere above, an unseen ventilation system rumbled softly, pushing air through the concrete veins of this buried structure. It felt alive. Marcus pressed forward, keeping close to the wall. The corridor ahead branched into smaller hallways, and he followed the one on the right, where he had glimpsed a glint of reflected light moments earlier. The air grew colder as he moved. The walls, once smooth and sterile, were now textured with grime and moisture. He passed a steel door, no handle, no window, no number, just a silent slab of metal in the wall. Then another. Then a third. He stopped, turned slowly toward one of them and reached out. His hand brushed the cold surface. It felt thick, insulated. The door didn't budge, but something about it made his stomach twist. These weren't storage rooms or maintenance areas. They were cells, prisons, coffins for the living. Then, as he turned to continue, he heard it, barely audible, almost a whisper, a cry, weak, hoarse, but unmistakably human. He froze, turning his head slowly, trying to locate the source. It came again, a whimper, a plea. He traced the sound to the last door on the left. This one was slightly ajar, not enough to see in, but enough to confirm it hadn't sealed shut like the others. His fingers slipped into the gap and pulled gently. The hinges groaned, protesting the movement. Inside, the room was dark, lit only by the sickly green emergency lights outside. A figure sat hunched in the corner, knees to chest, arms wrapped tightly around thin legs. At first, Marcus couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. The clothes were tattered, the skin pale. The person flinched violently at the creak of the door, hiding their face. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, stepping inside slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The figure didn't move, didn't speak. He crouched, lowering himself until they were eye level. Only then did the girl raise her head. She couldn't have been older than 17. Her face was streaked with tears and grime, her lips cracked, eyes bloodshot and wide with terror. There was a small gash on her temple, half healed, and a plastic wrist restraint still fastened around one arm. She looked at Marcus with disbelief. "Are you real?" she asked, voice hoarse. Marcus nodded. "I'm here to get you out." Her body shuddered with a sob, but she made no move to rise. "How long have you been here?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she whispered. "A week? More? They took my phone. They said if I screamed, they'd make me disappear." "Did you see anyone else?" "Girls, some younger, some older. Not many stayed long." Marcus felt a slow burn rise in his chest. He stood and offered her his hand. "Can you walk?" She nodded, barely, and struggled to her feet. Her legs wobbled, and she nearly fell. Marcus caught her, steadying her with one arm, scanning the hallway again. "We have to move," he said, quietly. He led her back into the corridor, listening for any sign of movement. Everything was still. Too still. It was the kind of silence that warned of pressure building just beyond the walls. As they walked, she clung to his side, limping. He kept his sidearm ready, though the hallways were too narrow for a proper draw. The place had been designed to trap, not to escape. Every turn brought more identical doors. He pushed open another one on a whim. Inside was another cell, empty this time. A mattress, a metal bucket, faint markings on the wall, scratches, names, dozens of them, written, carved, etched into the paint. Names of girls, maybe boys. One name was repeated several times, Elena. The last instance was followed by the word gone. He shut the door and pressed on. Farther down the hall, they reached a wider space. A large room with metal cabinets and counters, a table in the center, restraints bolted to its corners. Chains hung from the ceiling like grotesque decorations. On a nearby shelf, a camera, a bright light. The smell in the room was sterile, but beneath it lingered something rotten. Fear, desperation, something that couldn't be cleaned away. The girl stopped at the threshold. "I don't want to go in there." "You won't," Marcus said. "We're getting out." He guided her past it and into the next corridor, but now he was disoriented. The tunnels branched in irregular patterns, intersecting and looping. There were no signs, no maps, no logic. Whoever designed this place had intended it to be disorienting. They reached a junction, and Marcus hesitated. Left or right? The girl whimpered behind him, clutching his sleeve. "This way," he said, choosing left. It led to a dead end. As he turned to backtrack, a sound stopped him cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Someone was coming. Marcus drew his weapon and pushed the girl behind him. The footsteps drew closer, then stopped. He held his breath. Seconds passed, then a voice. "You're not supposed to be down here." It was calm, male, deep. From the shadows emerged a man in tactical black, body armor molded to his frame, sidearm holstered but hand near it. His face was expressionless, unreadable. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. "I could ask you the same thing," the man replied. "But it doesn't matter. You've seen too much." The man reached for his weapon. Marcus didn't wait. He fired. The shot rang like thunder through the tunnel. The man staggered, hit in the shoulder, and fell back with a grunt. Marcus grabbed the girl's arm and ran. He didn't know where he was going anymore. The tunnel twisted, turned, narrowed. He looked for any sign, any escape hatch, any air vent, anything. Then he saw it. A door, different from the others. Not reinforced metal, but old wood, marked maintenance. He threw it open. Behind it, a set of narrow stairs spiraled upward. "This is it," he said. "Come on." They climbed, the girl wheezing beside him, struggling with every step. Marcus half carried her by the time they reached the top. The door at the end was rusted, but he forced it open with his shoulder. They emerged into darkness. A storage shed, stacks of boxes, a mop bucket, a rusted water heater, but above them, moonlight. A small glass vent at the top of the wall. A way out. Marcus boosted the girl up, then climbed after her, shoving the pane open and pulling them both through. They tumbled out into the alley behind a neighboring building. Cool night air hit them like a blessing. Marcus pulled her to her feet and started toward the street. Then he heard sirens. Faint. Distant. He turned to the girl. "Can you run?" "I think so." He took her hand. And they ran. The streets of Riverport were not built for this kind of night. As Marcus and the girl stumbled out of the alley, her bare feet slapping the asphalt and his own body burning with exhaustion and pain. The town around them looked exactly the same. Dim street lights, shuttered storefronts, a newspaper rustling in the wind from someone's front porch. But everything had changed. The silence that once felt routine now felt complicit. The familiarity of the streets felt like betrayal. The world had watched that McDonald's for years, passing it every day, never imagining what lay just beneath their feet. Marcus tightened his grip on the girl's arm, helping her keep pace. She had already begun to shake violently, the trauma of the last hours catching up to her now that she was above ground. Her thin shirt clung to her body with sweat, and her breath came in shallow gasps. He could see the skin on her feet peeling from the rough concrete, but she didn't make a sound. She just ran. At the corner of Delaney and Hearst, a streetlight flickered above them. Marcus paused under it, pulling the girl to a stop. She leaned against a mailbox, clutching her ribs, nearly collapsing. He looked around. The silence still held, but faintly, from beyond the next block, came the distant wail of sirens. Not police sirens. Not Riverport cruisers. Emergency sirens. Federal. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his personal phone. The screen cracked from the earlier fight. No signal. Of course not. He doubted any of the phones in the area would work until someone flipped the switch back at the command post. He needed a line out, and fast. "We have to keep going," he said. The girl looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "Where?" she whispered. "There's a gas station 2 blocks up. Payphone." She nodded weakly. He didn't wait for her to move on her own. He scooped her up into his arms. She was light, frighteningly so, and barely flinched as he carried her down the dark street, each footstep echoing off the closed windows and drawn curtains. Somewhere, a dog barked once and went silent. The gas station was deserted when they arrived. The windows were barred, and the lights inside glowed a faint blue. The payphone was still mounted to the side wall next to an old vending machine with a broken display. Marcus propped the girl against the wall and picked up the receiver. He didn't bother with 911. He dialed a direct number from memory. After 3 rings, the line clicked. FBI, Field Division, Baton Rouge. "This is Officer Marcus Hale, badge number 47219, Riverport PD. I need federal response to 1880 Doral Street. Confirm backup, immediate extraction, hostages confirmed. 1 rescued minor in my custody. Facility is underground and active. Repeat, active." There was silence on the other end for a beat. Then, "Confirmed, Officer Hale. Hold position. Extraction inbound." He hung up. He crouched beside the girl again. "Help is coming," he said. "Real help." She nodded but said nothing. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 10, and then the lights came. They arrived not with the blare of sirens but with the silent power of authority. Unmarked black SUVs, a matte green tactical van, and finally a mobile command unit bristling with antennae. Men in body armor poured out, moving with precision, weapons drawn. One of them spotted Marcus and the girl and approached, lowering his weapon as he came near. "Are you Hale?" "Yes. We've got it from here." Marcus didn't let go of the girl until a female medic took her gently from his arms, speaking soft, soothing words as she guided her into the back of an ambulance. Only then did Marcus sit down on the curb, hands shaking, head swimming with exhaustion. Blood from his temple trickled down the side of his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was still underground, trapped in those narrow tunnels, hearing echoes of chains and whispers in the dark. More vehicles arrived, The McDonald's was sealed off, floodlights washing the facade in artificial daylight. The main doors were ripped open. Agents flooded inside. Somewhere beneath them, those same corridors still waited. Dark, wet, filled with secrets. Marcus knew there were more cells, more victims. He had seen only a corner of the operation. Whatever it was, it had gone on far too long and far too deep. 2 agents approached him. One was tall, pale, with the smooth posture of a man used to command. The other, a woman with short hair and sharp eyes, carried a tablet already flashing images. Maps, schematics, photos of faces Marcus didn't recognize. "Officer Hale, I'm Agent Rosen with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force," the man said. "This is Agent Serrano. We need a full statement." Marcus nodded. "You'll have it. Everything I know." They sat with him on the curb, and the questions began. What had he seen? Who had he encountered? Did he hear names? Where were the cells located? How many victims? How many suspects? He answered as best he could, his voice steady despite the chaos still roaring in his veins. When he told them about the man in body armor, about the equipment, the restraints, the medications, Serrano glanced at Rosen, their eyes hardening. "This is bigger than we thought," she muttered. Marcus finished his statement nearly an hour later. He was led into the command vehicle, where a medic cleaned the cut on his head and wrapped his wrist. The girl he had rescued was sitting nearby, sipping from a juice box wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were no longer wild, they were simply tired. She looked at Marcus and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. "You saved me." "No," he said quietly. "I just did what I was supposed to do." She reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cold but firm. Then she was led away, into another vehicle that would take her to a hospital, a shelter, maybe even a home. Somewhere far from the darkness beneath that restaurant. Marcus sat alone in the back of the van for a long time after that. By dawn, the operation had shifted from containment to recovery. The tunnels had been mapped, the chambers cataloged. Dozens of sealed rooms, equipment, and digital records were seized. The forensics team worked in grim silence, their suits whispering as they moved through the horror. In one locked chamber, agents found 8 more victims, 4 girls, 3 boys, and 1 woman in her 20s. Malnourished, afraid, but alive. The scale of the operation made national headlines within hours. Federal authorities confirmed that the McDonald's franchise at 1880 Doral was the epicenter of a trafficking ring operating under the guise of a legitimate business. Its owner, Martin Velen, was arrested at a private airport just hours before boarding a flight to Istanbul. More arrests followed across 3 states, lawyers, brokers, even a local city councilman. And in Riverport, the people who had once eaten breakfast under the golden arches now stood behind yellow tape, watching as a dark secret was pulled from the earth, piece by piece. Marcus declined all interviews. The media called him a hero. The department issued a formal commendation, but he didn't attend the ceremony. He spent the following days in silence, walking the length of the town in the early hours, unable to rest, unable to forget. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that corridor, those doors, those words carved into the wall, "Don't forget me." He didn't. One morning, a package arrived at his home. No return address. Inside, a card. It read, "I'm safe. I'm in a real school now. I'm learning to play the piano. You saved my life." There was no signature, but he knew who it was from. He sat on his porch and read it 3 times. Then, finally, he slept. The days that followed blurred into one another like watercolor on wet paper. Marcus moved through them with a strange detachment, his senses dulled not by exhaustion but by something colder. He felt suspended in a space between action and aftermath, like a man standing in the eye of a storm that had already passed but left behind a landscape unrecognizable. Riverport, the sleepy southern town that had once lulled him into believing that darkness always came from somewhere else, had torn off its mask. The revelation, now laid bare beneath television spotlights and national headlines, left the entire community trembling under the weight of a truth too ugly to name. The first formal interrogation took place 48 hours after the raid. Marcus sat in a windowless conference room inside the regional federal field office, his injuries bandaged, his uniform replaced by a plain shirt and jeans. Across from him sat Agent Serrano, her eyes sharp but not unkind, and a man from Internal Affairs who had yet to speak more than a single sentence since entering. A digital recorder blinked steadily on the table between them, each red pulse like a heartbeat in the silence. "You understand why we have to ask you these questions?" Serrano said, her voice calm but layered with the steel of procedure. Marcus nodded once. "You entered the McDonald's property without a warrant, without backup, without notifying your department." "Yes." "You disabled the rear lock using unauthorized tools." "Yes." "You engaged in a physical altercation with at least one suspect underground, discharged your weapon without immediate threat assessment, and removed a minor from the scene before law enforcement arrived." "Yes." Serrano paused. "Do you regret it?" "No." The man from Internal Affairs finally spoke. "You violated multiple procedural protocols, Officer Hale. You knowingly acted outside the boundaries of your jurisdiction and training." Marcus met his gaze. "And you all missed what was going on for years." The silence that followed was heavy. Serrano interjected before the conversation turned combative. "We're not here to punish you, but the scope of what we've uncovered demands accountability. The public will ask why this wasn't found sooner, why there were no flags, no reports." "There were reports," Marcus said quietly. "There were signs. People just didn't want to look." "And your department?" "They told me to leave it alone." Serrano nodded, as if confirming something she already suspected. She tapped the tablet in front of her and pulled up a list of names. "These are the individuals arrested so far in connection with the site. Martin Vellon is the highest profile, but we've got a half-dozen intermediaries, drivers, handlers, false ID suppliers. We know there were more. We need to know if you heard names, saw anything that might help us close the loop." Marcus leaned forward, eyes scanning the screen. Several faces jumped out at him immediately. The tall man in body armor, the silent handler with the gloves, but many others remained shadows, people he may have passed underground without even realizing it. Still, he answered every question, recounted every detail he could recall from that night and the weeks leading up to it. The girl's name, when she whispered it, the layout of the tunnels, the smells, the boxes filled with syringes, every fragment, every shard. Nothing was spared. When the interview finally ended, nearly 4 hours later, Marcus stood and rolled the tension from his shoulders. As he turned to leave, Serrano stopped him. "We'll be making a public statement in a few days. You'll be named." "I figured. You saved lives, officer. No one's denying that. But there will be pressure, inquiries, a narrative." "Let them come," Marcus said. "I've already lived it." He walked out without another word. Back in Riverport, the police department was unraveling. Captain Dunham was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation into negligence and possible complicity. 2 other officers, including Marcus's former shift sergeant, were quietly reassigned. Files that had once been marked as closed due to lack of evidence were being reopened, now under federal supervision. Community trust had cracked open, spilling out years of unspoken fear, quiet suspicion, and retrospective horror. People began coming forward. Parents who remembered strange vans near the school. A janitor who once worked at the McDonald's and was fired after asking too many questions. A high school student who recalled a friend getting a job interview there, then vanishing from social media and never showing up at school again. Each story sharpened the outline of the truth Marcus had already seen, down in those tunnels where the light didn't reach. The media storm was relentless. News vans camped outside the building, journalists knocked on doors, headlines cycled hourly, McDonald's trafficking ring, small-town horror officer Hale's warning ignored, systemic failure, underneath our feet, Riverport's nightmare. Through it all, Marcus stayed silent. He refused interviews, declined talk shows, let his face appear in grainy photos but never in person. He wasn't interested in being a symbol. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who had walked into a place no one else would and brought someone out. And even that had come at a price. He returned to the department once, just once, to clean out his locker. The building was quieter than usual, the tension so thick it felt like walking underwater. Most of the officers avoided his gaze. Some nodded stiffly. A few offered handshakes. None said what they really wanted to. They didn't need to. He packed his things, closed the locker, and handed his resignation to the acting chief without ceremony. Later that week, he received a letter. It was official. The Department of Justice had concluded its preliminary inquiry and cleared him of wrongdoing. His actions, though outside protocol, had directly led to the exposure of a criminal network and the rescue of multiple victims. No charges would be filed, no sanctions imposed. He was free. Free, but changed. He spent his days walking by the river, the late summer heat now giving way to cooler winds. He didn't sleep much. He stopped shaving. He sat on his porch for hours, watching the street that never really changed, though everything else had. One morning, he got a visit. It was Serrano. She came alone, in plain clothes with no badge visible. He offered her coffee, and they sat in silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke. "You know, they're already rebuilding the place." He nodded. "Of course they are. New owners, total remodel, different name, but people will remember." "They should." She took a breath. "The investigation is going national. The tunnel system connects to older infrastructure. We're finding similar patterns in other cities." Marcus didn't respond. "You were the first," she said. "Without you—" He shook his head. "I wasn't the first. I was just the first one who didn't look away." She smiled softly. "That's enough." She left him with a file folder, unclassified now. Photos of the rescued victims, most of them reunited with family, some placed in safe homes. One page stood out. It was a short letter from the girl he'd rescued. She wrote that she'd started school again, that she'd been adopted, that she had a dog now, that she still dreamed of tunnels but was starting to dream of other things too. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, she'd written, "I hope you're okay. I think about you. I hope you sleep." Marcus folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his desk drawer. That night, for the first time in weeks, he left the window open and let the wind move freely through the house. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, not expecting peace, but accepting the silence as something different from before. Not emptiness, not numbness, just quiet. And for now, that was enough. Autumn crept into Riverport without fanfare. The muggy weight of summer lifted slowly, like a curtain peeling back after an overlong performance. The mornings grew crisp, lawns turned gold. Porch chairs were pulled closer to the sun as the shadows stretched longer. Life, it seemed, was returning to normal, at least on the surface. But Marcus Hale knew better than most that silence did not always mean peace. Sometimes it meant something had been buried, and buried things had a way of clawing back to the surface. He had not worn his badge in weeks. Not since the morning he turned in his resignation and walked away from the only job he'd ever known. His uniform hung in the back of the closet, sealed in a plastic cover, untouched. He wasn't bitter about leaving. He had never been the type to romanticize institutions, but what had happened had carved something out of him. Not just the horror of the tunnels or the crimes he uncovered, but the way it had all stayed hidden for so long. The people who had chosen comfort over questions. The silence that protected monsters. Marcus spent his days walking. The same routes he had once patrolled, but slower now, without purpose. Not to watch for crime or check on local shopkeepers, but just to feel the air. To remind himself that the world still moved. He passed by the burned-out husk of what had once been the McDonald's on Doral Street. The building had been demolished quickly after the investigation ended, the debris hauled away under the supervision of federal agents. The lot stood vacant now, surrounded by a tall wooden fence. On the outside of the fence, someone had spray-painted a message in black paint. We didn't see, but we know now. No one had removed it. No one dared. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from a woman named Emily Morris. She was with the Department of Justice, overseeing victim outreach. She had been the one coordinating placement services for the rescued girls and boys from the tunnels. They spoke for nearly an hour, and by the end of the conversation, Marcus found himself staring at a plane ticket confirmation in his inbox. She had invited him to visit one of the safe houses upstate, not as a witness or an officer, but simply as someone they wanted to thank. He almost didn't go. But 3 days later, he stood on a narrow porch outside a modest farmhouse surrounded by trees already turning orange. A breeze carried the smell of hay and wood smoke. A teenage girl opened the door. She was taller than he remembered, her hair grown out, her skin no longer pale and sunken. She wore a sweatshirt with a school logo and clutched a mug of something steaming. She smiled. He didn't recognize her at first. Then she tilted her head slightly, the same way she had when she'd looked up at him that night, huddled in the corner of her cell. Her eyes were different now, not empty, not frightened, just clear. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. Marcus stepped forward, unsure what to do with his hands. "Neither did I." She held the door open wider. "You want to come in?" Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and baked bread. A fireplace crackled in the next room. There were books on the shelves, photos on the walls. A home. Marcus sat at the kitchen table while the girl, her name was Lily now, not the one she'd been born with but the one she'd chosen, talked about her classes, her friends, a dog named Shadow who barked too much, and a woman named Denise who'd become her foster mother and soon would be her adoptive one. She didn't talk about the tunnels. He didn't ask. After an hour, she walked him to the door and slipped something into his hand. It was a folded piece of paper. On one side was a pencil drawing, shaky but full of effort, of him. Broad shoulders, square jaw, the familiar weight in his eyes. Beside him stood a girl with messy hair and bare feet. They were holding hands. Above them was a single word, scrawled in big blocky letters. Light. Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat and tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket. He didn't say goodbye. He just nodded and turned, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he walked back to his truck. Back in Riverport, the changes continued. A citizens' oversight committee had been formed to review police conduct. Several officers were dismissed, others reassigned. The new chief, a woman named Tanya Caldwell, had served as a community liaison for years and was known for her no-nonsense ethics. She called Marcus once, inviting him to join the committee as an advisor. He thanked her, but declined. He was done with structures. One morning, the fence around the vacant lot came down. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just a crew of workers who arrived before dawn and erected a small granite monument in the corner of the property. No names, no speeches, just a plaque, in memory of those who were taken and those who refused to look away. Marcus stood before it alone that afternoon, the sky overcast, a wind stirring dry leaves around his feet. He read the words 3 times, then sat on the bench nearby and watched the clouds roll in. People passed. Some glanced at the monument, others paused. No one spoke. The silence was different now. It wasn't denial. It wasn't complicity. It was reverence. Weeks passed, then months. Winter settled in, gentle but steady. Marcus found comfort in its stillness. He spent more time with his daughter, who had flown in from Atlanta after hearing about everything secondhand through the news. Their conversations were quiet, sometimes strained, but healing. She had grown, and so had he, each in their own ways. One evening, Marcus pulled a box from his closet. It held photos from his early days on the force, medals, faded commendations, notebooks filled with reports no one had read. He sorted through them slowly, tossing most into a trash bag. But he kept one thing, the small black notebook he'd carried every night during his surveillance of the McDonald's. On the last page, in his own cramped handwriting, was the first line he'd written when this had all begun. "They think no one's watching." He took out a pen and wrote beneath it, "But someone always is." He closed the notebook and slid it into a drawer. That night, as snow began to fall outside, Marcus turned off every light in the house. He sat by the window, the town quiet around him, no sirens, no screams, no secrets slipping beneath doors. Just silence. And for the first time, it felt like peace. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Check out the next video or explore the rest of the channel. And if this story moved you